The rain fell in relentless sheets over the small coastal town of Harbour's End, a forgotten speck on the Pacific Northwest's jagged shoreline, where the grey sky seemed to press down like a heavy hand. Sarah Lawson sat on a splintered bench, outside the Driftwood Motel, her thin jacket soaked through, clinging to her skin as water dripped from her dark hair onto her bruised cheek. The neon sign above flickered, buzzing faintly, casting a sickly glow over her and the small shivering figure curled in her lap, her 4-year-old daughter, Lily, whose coughs came in weak, rasping bursts, each one a knife to Sarah's heart. She pulled Lily closer, shielding her from the wind that whipped through the empty parking lot, whispering, "It's okay, baby. Mama's here. We'll find somewhere warm soon." Her voice trembled, not from the cold, but from the lie she could barely force out, because Sarah had nothing. No money, no home, no one to call after the last door had slammed shut in her face. Earlier that day, she'd stood at the iron gates of the Hensley estate, rain blurring her vision as she begged Margaret Hensley, her ex-partner's mother, for help, just a few dollars for medicine or a night's shelter for Lily. Margaret, in her pristine wool coat, had stared down at her like she was dirt, her voice cutting through the storm. "You ruined my son, sent him to prison with your lies, and now you dare ask for my help? That child is better off without you." Sarah had clutched Lily, fever hot and crying, and pleaded, "She's your granddaughter, please, she's sick." But the gate closed with a clang, and the security guard's hand on her arm pushed her back into the mud. She'd stumbled away, Lily's weight heavy in her arms, her sneakers sinking into the gravel, until they reached this bench, the only place left to sit in a town that had turned its back. Sarah's own sister, miles away in Portland, had been her last hope, but when she called from a payphone, her voice shaking, her sister's reply was ice. "You chose that man, Sarah. You chose this mess. Don't drag us into it." The line went dead, and Sarah stood there, the receiver slipping from her hand, feeling the world shrink to just her and Lily, alone against the rain. Now, as cars hissed past on the coastal highway, their headlights slicing through the dusk, none slowed. None saw the mother rocking her child, murmuring promises she couldn't keep. Lily's cough grew sharper, her small hands clutching Sarah's jacket, her face pale and slick with sweat despite the chill. Sarah pressed her lips to Lily's forehead, feeling the heat there, and whispered, "Stay with me, sweetheart, just hold on a little longer." Her canvas bag, torn at the seams, sat at her feet holding a half-empty pack of crackers, a crumpled photo of Lily as a baby, and a single useless dollar bill. The motel clerk had already turned her away, saying, "No vacancies for your kind." His eyes lingering on her bruises, judging her story, pod before she could tell it. Sarah's throat tightened, not from anger but from the weight of being invisible, of being reduced to a problem no one wanted to solve. She looked down at Lily, whose eyes fluttered half open, and saw the trust there, the belief that Mama could fix anything, and it broke something deep inside her. She bowed her head, her tears mixing with the rain, and prayed silently, "If you're listening, don't take her. Take me instead. She's all I have." The rain kept falling, the wind kept howling, and Harbour's End moved on without them, a town too busy to notice a mother and child fading into the storm. The rain had carved Harbour's End into a blur of grey and shadow, where the seas roar, and the wind's howl drowned out even the faintest hope of warmth. Sarah Lawson remained on the bench outside the Driftwood Motel, her body a fragile shield around Lily, whose coughs had grown sharper, each one a jagged reminder of time slipping away. The town's indifference was a weight heavier than the rain. Every car that sped by on the coastal highway a silent verdict. "You are not our problem." Sarah's hands trembled as she tucked Lily's damp hair behind her ear, whispering, "We're okay, baby. Just rest. Mama's got you." Though her voice cracked with the fear that she was failing the one person who mattered most. Her mind replayed the morning's rejection at the Hensley estate, where Margaret's cold eyes had stripped her bare, her words like venom. "You're a stain on this family, Sarah. You and that child are nothing to us." The security guard's grip had left bruises on her arm, but it was Margaret's refusal to even look at Lily, feverish and trembling, that cut deepest, a betrayal of blood that left Sarah reeling. She'd stumbled through the rain-soaked streets, Lily's weight growing heavier with each step, until she reached the payphone outside the gas station, her last coin trembling in her hand as she dialed her sister in Portland. "Please, Jess, I just need a place for Lily, she's so sick," she'd begged. But her sister's voice was a wall. "You picked him, Sarah. You picked that life. Don't expect me to clean up your mess." The dial tone had echoed like a door slamming shut, and Sarah had stood there, rain pooling in her shoes, realizing she was truly alone. Now, on the bench, with Lily's breathing shallow and her small hands clutching Sarah's jacket, the weight of those rejections pressed down harder than the storm. The motel clerk's sneer, "No vacancies for your kind," still burned, his eyes lingering on her bruised cheek, as if it told her whole story. Broken, worthless, disposable. Sarah's bag, slumped at her feet, held nothing to fight the cold or the fever. A few crackers, a crumpled photo of Lily's first smile, a dollar bill that couldn't buy even a moment's shelter. She pressed her lips to Lily's forehead, the heat there a quiet terror, and murmured, "You're my whole world, you know that, don't you?" Lily's eyes fluttered, half open, her voice a faint rasp. "Mama, it's cold." Sarah's heart fractured, her tears falling silently into Lily's hair, each one a plea to a universe that seemed to have forgotten them. She'd lost her job at the diner weeks ago, her ex-partner's threats ensuring no one would keep her on, and the eviction notice had come like a final blow, leaving them on the street with nowhere to turn. The town of Harbour's End, with its salt-worn houses and shuttered shops, moved on around them, its people too busy or too hardened to notice a mother and child fading into the dusk. Sarah's prayers grew desperate, a silent bargain with the sky. "Take me, not her. She's too little, she's too good." The rain kept falling, relentless, soaking through the last of her resolve, until a new sound broke the storm's rhythm, the slow crunch of tires on wet gravel. A pickup truck, its paint faded to a dull green, eased to a stop across the lot, its headlights cutting through the gloom. Sarah didn't look up, her arms tightening around Lily, too weary for hope, too bruised by cruelty to believe in kindness. The driver's door creaked open, boots splashed through puddles, and a shadow fell over them, steady and unhurried. A voice, low and calm, cut through the wind. "She's burning up, isn't she?" Sarah's head lifted, her eyes meeting those of a man in his early 40s, his face weathered by sea and time, his grey jacket slick with rain. He crouched a few feet away, not close enough to threaten, his hands visible, holding a thermos and a folded blanket. "I've got soup, warm and sealed, and a dry place not far from here," he said, his voice steady, not demanding trust, but offering it. Sarah's grip on Lily tightened, her heart racing with the instinct to run, but Lily's cough, weak and ragged, anchored her. The man, Thomas Reed, though she didn't know his name yet, set the thermos and blanket on the ground, stepping back to give her space. "No one's touching you, I promise. Take what you need," he said, his eyes not on her bruises but on Lily's pale face, a flicker of something human in his gaze. Sarah hesitated, her fingers brushing the thermos, its warmth a shock against her cold skin. She looked at Lily, whose lips were cracked, her breathing too fast, and something inside her shifted, not trust, not yet, but the raw need to keep her daughter alive. She nodded, barely perceptible, and Thomas opened the truck's back door, stepping aside as Sarah gathered Lily, her legs trembling as she rose. The truck's cab was warm, the heater humming softly, and as Sarah settled Lily against her chest, Thomas climbed into the driver's seat without a word, his silence a kind of mercy. The rain battered the windshield, but inside, for the first time in hours, Sarah felt a sliver of shelter, not safety, but a pause in the storm. She held Lily close, her eyes fixed on the back of Thomas's head, searching for a threat, but finding only a man driving steadily through the dark toward a place she couldn't yet imagine. The truck's headlights carved a narrow path through the rain-soaked night, the wipers sweeping rhythmically as Harbour's End faded into a blur of salt and shadow behind them. Sarah Lawson sat rigid in the back seat, Lily's feverish body pressed against her chest, the child's shallow breaths a fragile thread tying Sarah to the moment. The warmth of the cab was a foreign thing, wrapping around her like an unearned gift, and though it eased the chill in her bones, it did nothing to quiet the storm in her mind. She watched Thomas Reed's silhouette in the driver's seat, his, hands steady on the wheel, his eyes flicking occasionally to the rearview mirror. Not to pry, but to check on Lily, whose coughs punctuated the silence like a clock ticking down. Sarah's fingers tightened around her daughter, her bruised arm aching under the weight, and she whispered, "We're okay, baby, just rest. You're safe now." Though the word safe felt like a betrayal, a promise she couldn't make. Her heart raced with questions she didn't dare ask. Who was this man? Why had he stopped when no one else had? What did he want? The thermos and blanket he'd offered sat beside her, untouched, their warmth a quiet accusation of her distrust. Yet Lily's fever, burning through her thin dress, left no room for pride or suspicion. Sarah had accepted the ride because there was nothing else, because the alternative was watching her daughter fade on that rain-soaked bench. The memory of the day clawed at her. Margaret Hensley's icy rejection, her sister's cold dismissal, the motel clerk's sneer, all proof that the world had no place for her, that her love for Lily was not enough to shield them from its cruelty. She pressed her cheek to Lily's forehead, the heat there a silent scream, and murmured, "I'm here, I won't let go," as if words could hold back the fever. The truck turned onto a gravel road, the tires crunching softly, and through. The rain-streaked window, Sarah glimpsed a faint outline of a cabin, its windows glowing like beacons in the dark. Thomas slowed, then stopped, and without a word he stepped out, his boots splashing in puddles as he opened the back door. "It's warm inside, cots made, water's clean," he said, his voice low, not pushing, just stating facts. Sarah hesitated, her arms tightening around Lily, but the child's weak cough broke her resolve. She slid out, her legs unsteady, and followed Thomas to the cabin, the rain stinging her face. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and salt, the space cluttered with fishing nets, a worn armchair and a small table holding a single framed photo, a woman and a young girl, their faces blurred by time. Thomas flicked on a lamp, its light soft and golden, and pointed to a hallway. "Rooms down there, blankets in the drawer, basin for water," he said, then stepped back, giving her space to move. Sarah carried Lily to the small bedroom, laying her on a cot with a patched quilt, the child's breathing too fast, her lips cracked and pale. Panic surged, but then she saw it, a basin of warm water on the nightstand, steam rising gently, beside a stack of clean cloths and a small knitted doll with a note in simple handwriting. "My girl loved this. Hope it helps yours." Sarah's breath caught, her fingers brushing the doll's soft yarn, and for a moment she stood frozen, the weight of this stranger's kindness cracking something inside her. She dipped a cloth in the water, testing it first, then gently wiped. Lily's face, her arms, her small hands whispering, "You're so strong, baby, we're going to get through this." Lily stirred, her eyes fluttering open, and rasped, "Mama, is this home?" Sarah's throat tightened, unable to answer, because home was a word she'd forgotten, a place she'd lost long before the eviction. She reached for the doll, tucking it beside Lily, and began brushing her daughter's tangled hair with her fingers, each stroke a silent vow to keep fighting. The cabin's quiet was different from the motel's, not empty but full, like the pause between waves, and though Sarah's guard remained, she felt a shift, a sliver of relief in this space where no one demanded her story. Thomas's footsteps echoed faintly in the kitchen, and she glanced at the door, half expecting him to appear, to ask for something in return, but he didn't. Instead, she heard the clink of a kettle, the soft creak of a chair, and nothing more. Sarah's eyes fell to the note again, the words "my girl" stirring an ache she couldn't name, and she wondered who Thomas had lost, what grief had shaped this cabin into a refuge for strangers. She hadn't cried when Margaret turned her away, nor when her sister hung up, nor when the town looked through her like she was nothing, but now, holding this small act of care, tears spilled silently down her cheeks. She pressed the doll to Lily's chest, and the child murmured, "It's soft, Mama," her voice a faint spark in the dark. Sarah's sobs came quietly, her body trembling not from fear, but from the overwhelming weight of being seen, of being offered shelter without judgment. In the hallway, Thomas paused, hearing the soft sound of her crying, but he didn't knock, didn't speak, just leaned against the wall, his own eyes distant, as if her pain stirred a memory he'd buried long. Ego. The cabin held them both, its walls absorbing their separate griefs, and for the first time in months Sarah felt not safe, not yet, but held, like the sea cradling a ship through a storm. She wiped her tears, kissed Lily's forehead, and settled. Beside the cot, her hand resting on her daughter's, the doll a small bridge between their world and this stranger's kindness. Outside the rain softened, its rhythm a quiet promise that the night might hold more than despair. Morning light crept through the salt-streaked windows of Thomas Reed's cabin, a soft glow that softened the edges of the small bedroom where Sarah Lawson sat beside Lily's cot. The rain had eased to a drizzle, its patter a faint echo of the storm that had driven them here. But Sarah's world remained tethered to her daughter's steady breathing, each rise and fall of Lily's chest a fragile victory over the fever that had gripped her through the night. Sarah's hand rested on the knitted doll tucked against Lily, its yarn worn but soft, a quiet gift from a man whose kindness still felt like a riddle she couldn't solve. She hadn't slept, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, but her body stayed, alert, braced for the moment this haven would vanish like every other refuge she'd dared to hope for. The cabin's warmth, the scent of wood smoke and sea salt wrapped around her, but it couldn't touch the ache of yesterday. Margaret Hensley's cold dismissal, her sister's betrayal, the town's silent judgment, all proof that her love for Lily was a flame no one else cared to shield. Sarah brushed a strand of hair from Lily's face, whispering, "You're still here, baby, that's all that matters," her voice a threadbare shield against the fear that lingered. Lily stirred, her eyes fluttering open, and murmured, "Mama, the doll smells like flowers," her voice weak but clear, a spark that made Sarah's heart lurch with relief. She smiled, pressing her lips to Lily's forehead, the skin cooler now, the fever breaking like a tide receding. On the nightstand, a tray waited. 2 slices of toast, a small jar of honey, a glass of water, left by Thomas before dawn. His presence felt more in absence than intrusion. Sarah fed Lily slowly, tearing the toast into tiny pieces, her hands trembling not from cold, but from the weight of this moment, this pause where her daughter was safe, fed, alive. The cabin's quiet was a language of its own, not demanding answers or explanations, and it let Sarah breathe in a way she hadn't in months. She glanced at the door, half expecting Thomas to appear, to ask for her story or her gratitude, but the hallway remained empty, the only sound, the distant clink of a mug in the kitchen. Her eyes fell to the note beside the doll. "My girl loved this, hope it helps yours," and she wondered again who his girl had been, what loss had carved this space into a sanctuary for strangers. The thought stirred a flicker of connection, a shared shadow of grief, but Sarah pushed it down too raw to trust anything beyond Lily's needs. She helped Lily sit up, the child's small hands clutching the doll, and when Lily giggled softly, pointing at its button eyes, Sarah's throat tightened, not with tears, but with a fierce, unspoken vow to protect this lightness, however fleeting. Venturing into the hallway, Sarah carried Lily, her steps cautious, and found a paper boat on the floor, its edges crisp, with "For Lily" scrawled in careful letters. Lily's eyes widened and she whispered, "Mama, did you make it?" Sarah shook her head, her voice soft. "Someone made it for you, sweetheart." The gesture, small but deliberate, cracked another layer of her guard, and she felt the cabin shift from shelter to something more, a place where Lily could be a child, not just a survivor. Outside, the drizzle had stopped, and Sarah stepped onto the porch, Lily in her arms, to find Thomas in the small garden, his hands in the dirt, tending a patch of rosemary choked with weeds. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers briefly, and said, "Rosemary's stubborn, keeps fighting even when the soil's bad." Sarah knelt beside him, setting Lily on a blanket nearby, and without thinking, her hands joined his, pulling weeds, the earth cool and grounding under her fingers. They worked in silence, their breaths sinking, the rosemary's sharp scent rising like a promise of something enduring. Lily hummed to herself, clutching the paper boat, and for a moment, Sarah felt not whole but held, as if the earth itself was offering her a place to rest. Thomas stood, brushing dirt from his jeans, and looked at her, his voice quiet. I'm sorry, not for anything I've done, but for what you've carried alone." The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through her, and Sarah blinked, the sea air stinging her eyes. Or perhaps it was the weight of being seen, not as a failure, but as a fighter. She nodded, unable to speak, and they walked back to the cabin, Lily trailing behind, her paper boat clutched tight. On the porch, Thomas handed her a glass of water, sitting beside her without a word, his presence a steady anchor in the shifting tide of her fear. Sarah held the glass, her fingers tracing its edge, and felt something settle. Not trust, not yet, but space, a small clearing where she could breathe without bracing for the next blow. Inside, Lily napped, the doll and boat beside her, and the cabin's walls seemed to hum with a quiet life, not of promises but of moments, each one a step away from the rain-soaked bench where hope had nearly drowned. Sarah's heart, bruised but unbroken, clung to this fragility, knowing it might not last but choosing to stay in it, just for today. The days at Thomas Reed's cabin settled into a fragile rhythm, each one a delicate balance between relief and dread, as Sarah Lawson watched Lily grow stronger, her coughs fading and her laughter returning like a tide reclaiming the shore. Yet beneath the warmth of the cabin's wood smoke and the scent of rosemary from the garden, a new threat loomed, its shadow creeping into Sarah's every thought. It arrived in the form of an envelope, slipped into the mailbox at the end of the gravel drive, its crisp white surface bearing the seal of Harbour's End County Court. Sarah's hands shook as she tore it open, standing alone in the drizzle, her heart sinking at the words, "Petition for legal guardianship. Margaret." Hensley versus Sarah Lawson. Grounds, neglect, endangerment, unfit parenting. The air seemed to thicken, the sea's distant roar a mocking echo of her fear, and she clutched the papers, her vision blurring as she read the demand for sole custody of Lily, her 4-year-old daughter, the only light in her world. Margaret's accusations stung like salt in a wound, claims of instability, of homelessness, of failing to provide, each one a twisted truth that ignored the love that had carried Sarah through eviction, rejection, and despair. She stumbled back to the cabin, the papers hidden under her jacket, her mind racing with images of Lily being torn from her arms, of Margaret's cold mansion swallowing her daughter's laughter. Inside, Lily sat by the fireplace coloring with a crayon Thomas had found, her knitted doll propped beside her, and when she looked up, her eyes bright, Sarah forced a smile, whispering, "You're doing great, baby," though her voice trembled with the lie. Lily's question came soft, "Mama, why's your face sad?" And Sarah knelt, brushing her daughter's hair, saying, "Just tired, sweetheart, nothing you did." But the words felt hollow, her heart screaming that she might lose her. The town's whispers had already begun, their venom seeping into every errand, glares at the market, a baker who claimed no bread was left despite fresh loaves on display, a whispered, "She's using that fisherman for his land," as Sarah passed. Harbour's End, with its salt-worn docks and shuttered shops, had closed ranks, painting her as a leech, a failure, a mother who didn't deserve her child. Lily noticed, too, her small hand tightening in Sarah's as they walked, asking, "Why don't they smile at us, Mama?" And Sarah's answers faltered, unable to explain the cruelty of adults to a child who still believed in kindness. At night, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, the court papers spread before her, their words a relentless accusation, and her hands shook as she whispered, "I can't lose her, I'll break." The cabin's quiet amplifying her fear. Thomas appeared, setting a mug of tea before her, his presence steady, and said, "You're not alone in this, Sarah. You fight, and I'll stand with you." His words, simple but sure, sparked something in her. Not hope, but resolve, a fire, born from love that refused to surrender. She looked at him, eyes raw, and said, "She's all I have, Thomas. If they take her, I'm nothing." And he leaned forward, voice low, "You're her mother. You've carried her through worse. That's not nothing." The weight of his belief, unasked for but freely given, cracked her defenses, and she covered her face, trembling with the fear she'd held silent. Thomas didn't reach for her, didn't promise miracles, just sat there, his silence a shield. And in that moment, Sarah felt not fixed but fortified, as if his presence loaned her the strength to face the battle ahead. She thought of Lily, sleeping with the paper boat and doll, and remembered her daughter's voice in the dark. "You won't let them take me, right?" Sarah had whispered. "Never." And now that vow burned brighter, a defiance against Margaret's wealth, the town's scorn, the world's indifference. She recalled the bench outside the Driftwood Motel, the rain that had nearly drowned them, and how she'd carried Lily through it, bruised and broken but unyielding. This fight was no different, just another storm, and Sarah's love was a lighthouse, fierce and unwavering. Thomas rose, leaving her with the tea, and as he stepped into the hallway he paused, glancing back, his eyes carrying a quiet promise, not of victory, but of staying, no matter what came. Sarah folded the papers, her hands steadier now, and slipped them into her bag, her mind turning to the days ahead, the courtroom, the questions, the judgment. She didn't know if she could win, but she knew she would fight. For every smile Lily gave, for every giggle, for the weight of her small hand in hers. The cabin's walls seemed to hold her resolve, their cracks and patches a mirror of her own scars, and as she stood, she felt the ground beneath her shift, not to safety, but to a place where she could stand. Outside, the drizzle had stopped, the sea a distant murmur, and Sarah stepped onto the porch, breathing in the salt air, her heart heavy but unbroken. Lily's laughter, faint from the bedroom, carried through the quiet, a reminder of why she'd never stop, why she'd face Margaret, the court, the town, and every whisper that tried to tear them apart. Thomas's shadow moved in the garden, tending the rosemary, and Sarah watched him, not as a savior, but as a man who'd chosen to see, her to stay, and that choice, small as it was, gave her the courage to keep going. The fight was coming, and Sarah would meet it, not for herself, but for the child who called her Mama, who believed she could fix anything, even when the world said she couldn't. The courtroom in Harbour's End was a small, sterile box, its pale walls and polished wood benches a stark contrast to the wild sea just beyond the town's edge, and Sarah Lawson sat at the front, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles whitened, her heart a drumbeat of fear and defiance. Lily was at the cabin with Thomas's mother, Evelyn, a woman whose quiet strength had surprised Sarah, but here, alone under the judge's steady gaze, she felt the weight of Margaret Hensley's petition pressing down, its words, neglect, unfit, endangerment, branding her as a mother who'd failed. The past weeks had been a blur of whispers and glares, Harbour's End turning colder with each trip to town, where shopkeepers looked past her and neighbours muttered, "She's got no business raising that girl, not after what she did." Sarah's bruises had faded, but the town's judgment lingered, painting her as a schemer, a burden, a woman who'd brought ruin on herself and her child. She'd stopped going to the market after a woman hissed, "You're only with Thomas." For his land, everyone knows it. And Lily's questions, "Mama, why don't they like us?" had cut deeper than any insult. Now, as Margaret's lawyer stood, his voice smooth and sharp, listing Sarah's eviction, her joblessness, her nights on the street, she felt each word like a stone, building a wall between her and Lily. Yet, she held her head high, her eyes fixed on the judge, because giving up wasn't a choice. Not when Lily's laughter, her paper boat, her knitted doll were the anchors of her world. Thomas sat beside her, his presence a steady warmth. And behind them, Evelyn, her hands folded, her face unreadable but her attendance a silent vote of faith. The lawyer called Sarah to the stand, and she rose, her legs trembling, recounting the truth, her ex-partner's threats, the eviction, the rain-soaked bench, and her fight to keep Lily safe. Her voice broke when she spoke of Lily's fever, of carrying her through the storm, but it grew steady as she said, "I've never stopped fighting for her, not once. She's my everything." Margaret's lawyer pressed, twisting her words, asking why she'd endangered Lily by staying on the street, and Sarah's hands shook, but she answered, "I had nowhere else, but I never let her go." Thomas testified next, his voice calm, describing the night he found them. Lily's fever, Sarah's fierce love, and he said, "I've seen strength in her, the kind that doesn't break, the kind a child needs." Evelyn took the stand, her words measured but firm, speaking of Sarah's care, how she'd nursed Lily back to health, how she'd pulled weeds in the garden with a mother's quiet resolve, and the courtroom fell silent, her voice carrying the weight of a woman who'd known loss and recognized survival. Margaret sat across the room, her face a mask of disdain, but Sarah saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes, a crack in her certainty. The judge called a recess, and Sarah stepped outside, the sea air sharp, her heart racing as Thomas joined her, saying nothing, just standing close enough to share the weight. She whispered, "What if it's not enough?" And he replied, "You showed them who you are. That's enough for now." Back in the courtroom, the judge's voice was even, his, ruling clear. Petition denied, full custody remains with Sarah Lawson. Sarah's breath caught, her body trembling as relief flooded her, not joy but a release of fear so vast it left her dizzy. She turned to Thomas, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet nod, and Evelyn reached forward, her hand brushing Sarah's shoulder, a gesture small but heavy with understanding. That night the cabin glowed with soft light, the table set with roasted vegetables and bread, Lily chattering about a seashell she'd found, her knitted doll beside her plate. Sarah listened, her heart full, the clink of cutlery a music she'd feared she'd lose. Thomas passed the water, Evelyn added more potatoes to Lily's plate, and the room felt alive, not with grand gestures, but with the quiet of people choosing to stay. Later in the garden, Sarah and Thomas knelt among the rosemary, Lily colouring nearby, her paper boat tucked in her pocket. The sun dipped low, painting the sea amber, and Sarah said softly, "I thought no one would stay, not after seeing all my broken pieces." Thomas looked at her, his voice gentle. "I see them, Sarah, and I'm still here." Her breath hitched, not from pain, but from the weight of being chosen, not for perfection, but for her fight, her love, her stubborn heart. They stood, dirt on their hands, and walked to the porch, Lily running ahead, her laughter chasing the dusk. Sarah sat on the swing, Thomas beside her, their hands brushing, not grasping, just touching, a promise of presence, not forever, but for now. Inside, Lily showed Evelyn a drawing. 2 figures, a small girl, a cabin by the sea, and Sarah's eyes stung not with tears, but with the realization that this was home, not a place, but a feeling, built from shared silences, shared fights, shared hope. The sea murmured beyond the cliffs, its rhythm steady, and Sarah felt her heart settle, not healed but held, by a man who'd seen her at her lowest and stayed, by a child who believed in her, by a woman who'd chosen to see her strength. The cabin's lights glowed, the rosemary stood tall, and Sarah knew whatever came next she wasn't alone, not anymore.